Welcome back to Federal Insights, part of the Digital Modernization Series. The topic of this week's discussion is enterprise modernization, sponsored by GDIT here on Federal News Network. My guest today is Gwen Cadu. She's the Director of Enterprise IT and Managed Services at GDIT. I'm Tom Temin. And Gwen, let's talk about the idea of continuous development. I think you alluded to that to some degree in the first half, but I want to make the contrast between the old way, which is not so old because they still try it sometimes in the government, what they used to call the Big Bang, or the, launch it all at once and the waterfall type of way of getting at new applications versus the DevSecOps and continuous Scrum type of model. Discuss some of the advantages of that and how you help agencies get to that cultural approach and that technical approach.
Sure. The days of the Big Bang are definitely gone. Mainly, and I think some of the big reasons for that, I mean, there's not a lot of greenfield enterprises anymore. I mean, we've been building on these technologies over years. So things have just kind of grown as the technologies have grown. And so there just isn't, you very rarely run into a customer that says, hey, I need you to build me an enterprise from scratch. It's just not there because there's been years of investment and progressive investment in technologies to build the enterprises that we have.
Well, because one of the biggest challenges agencies face, not only from a technical standpoint, but with appropriators and with overseers, is the constant slippage of schedules. And so if you have a different approach to rolling out projects, maybe the schedules can be more cogent and they can adhere to them.
Sure. Well, I think what the true driver is just the speed of change and how quickly you need to get new capabilities, new technologies into an architecture. It's an iterative process, and you don't really have the time to wait until you get, all the way to the end and hopefully you've gotten what the user needed, and hopefully you've met, the mission requirements that they're looking for. So you really need to move a little bit quicker and give your customers that visibility into, yes, you're making progress, and yes, they can see, the build on capabilities and the build on function, and that you are actually, delivering something that they can actually look at and provide feedback. So that we can, if we are maybe going off track, they can, pivot us in another direction. But that's another important piece of that, is that continuous conversation with the customer to make sure that you are doing, that nothing's changed in the requirements and that you're doing what they're expecting. And getting that feedback is essential so that you don't end up running down the wrong path and not knowing it until, okay, you're at the end and you haven't delivered what they thought you were delivering. Because there's always that, I think you're doing this, well, I think you're doing that. So
sure. Yeah. And there's also the topic of technical debt comes in from time to time when agencies have not been modernizing and they're waiting too long to make some of the changes, incremental or more fundamental. And again, modernization is about cybersecurity. It's about delivering better digital services to citizens and other constituents. So besides the infrastructure, you've got what is really the mission, as you've mentioned several times. So the question is, how do you get agencies, how do they adopt this continuous approach to modernizing such that the technical debt doesn't arrive? And maybe also, while we're at it, talk about the issue of getting the most out of the technology that you already have. Because very often you hear agencies say, I'm only using 10% of what this tool can do. So that kind of ties into it also.
Sure. So, I mean, as far as today, I think most of our customers are comfortable or are familiar enough with the DevSecOps process that it's not as big of a hard sell as it has been, again, maybe 5 or 10 years ago when this was a new approach and you had to sit down and work with your customer and explain and have that open and honest conversation as to how that was going to work. I don't think there's as much concern about that. It's not quite as scary, I guess, as it used to be. And ultimately, I think it's the planning that's essential. You have to have, again, that strategic, and it's almost surgical in some aspects. And that, again, kind of going back to how the sort of sequence of events that need to occur to bring up a potential, if you are able to modernize a legacy component, it's got to be sort of a sequential set of steps to bring that capability to a point where you can then integrate it into a more structure. It is that still that sort of progressive, iterative process that we're working through to get that integrated. Oh,
And we'll edit that statement out there. And you talked at length about 5G and the potential there and some of the challenges of getting into the whole 5G world and the Internet of Things world. There's a few other technologies, automation, artificial intelligence, for example, that you mentioned briefly. Talk more about those and how those come into the modernization process.
sure. So yeah, I mean, right now automation is key to getting that sort of it's sort of a consistent goal of efficiency and cost savings. And the more you can automate using RPA bots and automating, different processes that are repetitive and letting the operators actually focus on real issues and not sort of, for lack of a better word, the administrivia of filling out tickets and those sorts of things. So that goes a long way, and in trying to in providing that efficiency for the enterprise. And then with artificial intelligence, it's actually sort of machine learning and artificial intelligence. I mean, machine learning is helping us understand the patterns in our networks and understanding when it doesn't look right and now there's an anomaly and being able to identify that quickly. That's all being done in the background. It's learning sort of behavior of your enterprise and being able to help you identify, when you may have issues that you might not recognize in standard tools. And then with artificial intelligence, it's actually sort of looking at all of the data that's coming in from your enterprise and then trying to make sense of that and analyze all of it and start looking at, what does, again, with the Internet of Things. So we've got all of this coming in. What's the impact of that on the performance of our network, and how might we be able to improve that? Where might we need to tweak something, and where maybe we don't. We just need to leave it alone, and that's okay.
And maybe the big difference between the Big Bang Theory or the Grand Design era approach and the Scrum continuous development approach of today is who's involved. So when you work with clearly IT departments and CIO channels at agencies, but some things you've said imply that maybe you need some of the users, maybe you need some of the mission owners that are going to deploy the eventual digital services. They need to be part of this whole process too, correct?
Absolutely. Sometimes, I mean, we're all about, we understand the mission. But the people who will tell you the honest truth about what's working, what's not working, or where they feel IT can better support them are your end users. Those are the folks, they know more about it than anybody else, even your CIOs, any of those folks. So if you don't talk to them, you're missing a huge piece of your requirements or of a piece of information that you have available to you to be able to help inform better decisions about what kind of technologies you may or may not need. That you have to talk to them. and that problem is sort of an age-old problem. It's been around for as long as I can remember. It's sort of like, engineering and operations don't talk to each other. Engineering doesn't talk to the users. Ops doesn't talk to the users. I mean, it's been around for a long, long time. You'd think we'd know by now how important and how valuable those insights are to really being effective in your modernization activities.
All right. I want to thank you for giving us some good questions to think about, some issues to go in with approaching these modernization efforts. We've been speaking with Gwen Cadu. She's the Director of Enterprise IT and Managed Services at GDIT. I'm Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search GDIT.